Good morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. For Bible class, please. Good to see everybody this morning. Welcome. Glad you are here. We're going to finish up the section that we're talking about with the life of Moses, this journey. Excuse me. Me and sinuses. I tell you, Trent has said one welcoming thing to me, and that is welcome and bring your allergy pills. And so I didn't have these struggles in Abilene, but I do here in Trenton. I still love it. I still love it. Glad to be here. Again, we're talking about Moses and his journey of faith, and we kind of touched on it a little bit last week and introduced this idea of stepping out by faith. Moses and now the children of Israel have gotten to the point to where Pharaoh has gone 10 rounds with God. And I told you last time, the older preachers used to take that and develop a sermon. And they used to say, your arms are too short to box with God. And this thing went 10 rounds. And the 10th round of this thing was actually the death angel, to where Pharaoh finally decided to come to his senses. But just because something is the end doesn't mean it's finished. And so we're going to see that again today. I'm taking my time through the study of Moses because the same way that Moses' life chronicled a journey of faith, I think that's a good template to be a chronicle for our life of faith. There are times when my faith, and I know your faith too, it ebb and flows. We're up and we're down, and we're up and we're down. And so when we're down, we don't need to give up and say that we're out, but we need to keep going and keep pressing forward when it comes to faith. And that's the life that we'll look at in the man Moses. I'll back up just a little bit in Exodus 12 to get the idea, the last plague, the last death angel, and talking about the blood on the doorpost for a second. And then they're going to pack up, and then it's time to relocate. It's time to move. And that'll get us in Exodus chapter 14. Let's begin with prayer, and we'll just jump right on into it. Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful, Lord, for your blessings. Thank you for waking us up to this beautiful day. We ask, Lord, that you continue to just strengthen us and allow our focus to always be on you. Lord, no matter what our circumstance in life is, help us to always keep our hearts and our eyes and our mind and just everything focused on you. We thank you for Christ and for what he means in our lives and for your sacrifice. Help us, Lord, to always do things that are pleasing and acceptable in your sight. We pray these things thanking you for everyone who is in Bible class with us, either in person or online. We just thank you for all your blessings in Jesus' name. Amen. Exodus chapter 12, you actually look at the back half of chapter 12. And again, for those who are online just answering the question, my translation usually is NIV. Sometimes I'll read from the King James, but most of the time when you follow me, you'll follow, if you have the NIV or any other reliable copy, you shouldn't have any problems. Three things when you look at Exodus 12 and this final chapter of Moses, and I think this is very, very interesting. Sometime I'll back up, maybe in 2023, and I'll do a separate study. You know, we always look at the 10 plagues from Moses' side. It would be an interesting study, and I've only done this one other time. It would be an interesting study to go back to Exodus like chapter 10 through about chapter 15 and look at that from Pharaoh's side. If you look at it from Moses' side and you look at faith, then from the other side, I think it would be an interesting study to see what happens when you proactively close your heart towards God. I think that would be an interesting study, and I've got that in my notes. I've got that in my notes for 2023. But three things when you're talking about this end of Moses' chapter, as the children of Israel now get the Passover, and then they get ready to pack up, and they get ready to leave Egypt. You got to talk about three things in this final section of Exodus: enjoying God's protection. Then, if you're going to enjoy his protection, you got to follow his direction. God gives us instruction. God gives us directions that he puts the choice right there, out there for us to follow, like any good parent, like your father and your mother did when you got to a certain age. Here's the rules. Here's what consequences are if you don't follow the rules. I'm just a scorekeeper. And we talked about that a little bit more. And then next week, and we may get to it today, we need to look at God's salvation. When they came face to face with that enemy at the Red Sea, and Pharaoh's army was behind them, and the obstacle of the Red Sea was in front of them, you know, we see a good glimpse of how people act when they're in trouble. And they forget all the blessings of God, and they take matters into their own hands. And God said something in that section that I really like. If I get to it today, I hope I do. God said, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. There's some good teaching in that. But Exodus chapter 12, I want to go back. And I want to look at the end and all of the sections in this. As we do our reading, what I want you to do and think and make application when it comes to your own faith journey. And you know me well enough to know not only do I read the Bible, but I try to apply it in modern day parlance. And how does it benefit me? And what can I learn to make myself better? Chapter 12, verse number 1. I'm going to skip around in chapter 12, but just to kind of give us a flavor for what's going on. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, this month is to be for you the first month, in the first month of the year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family and each for his household. And if any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share it with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of the lamb in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or from the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. And we already said last time we talked, twilight was kind of early in the morning, what my grandmother used to call early dawn. And late at the night, she actually said it was dusk dawn. Now, I still hadn't figured out dusk dawn. That seems like an oxymoron to me, but I'm going to leave that alone. I never could figure that out. But at twilight, at early morning, they're going to kill it. They need to slaughter this lamb. And then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and the tops of the door frame of the houses where they eat the lambs. And the same night, they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. This sound familiar to anybody? It should, because this is kind of a foreshadowing of really the Lord's Supper. Okay? And he said now, verse 9, don't eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over a fire with the head and the legs and the internal organs. Don't leave anything until morning. If something is left, or if some is left, until morning, you must burn it. Interesting. I thought he would say get a to-go box. No, he didn't say that. I'm sorry. This is how you are to eat it. Now look at this. This is where we can start our talk. Look at how they are to eat this Passover meal. Okay? With your cloak tucked in your belt. Cloak was that robe, if you remember, in biblical times, kind of tucked in your belt. And then with your sandals on your feet. Now, I don't know about you, but I said this before. I normally take my shoes off when I'm in my house. I have some slippers that I normally put on. But here, they're eating it with their sandals on their feet and with your staff. You know, they carry the long staff. The staff in your hand, and eat in haste. Well, I ain't got no problem with that. Jimmy might have a problem with that. I don't. Jimmy, I ain't got no problem. I ain't got no problem. That part I could obey, okay? I could obey. Eat in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. Anybody think this is kind of strange? I mean, look at how, they're eating it. In my picture in my mind, I'll get yours in a second. The picture in my mind, because they're eating fast and they're fully dressed. Hurry up and eat because we got to go. That's the picture that's in my brain. What picture's in your brain? Anything different? I mean, any comments? And, I was always told growing up, sit down, chew the food, try chewing the food once and see if that'll help you. But in this case, I think God was giving them some pretty good instruction. We got to go. And it's time. You've been crying to me now for over 400 years, and this is now the night before. It's time to pack, and it's time to go. So I find this kind of strange, but then again, I don't, because again, their blessing is coming for the prayers that they've been doing and asking for over 400 years. Now it's time to kind of get things. Do you have a routine when you get ready to go on a trip? Do you have a routine the night before? Made a note to ask this because I'm just curious. I think it'll help our discussion. Do you have a traveling routine when you get ready to go the night before? Anything special that happens at your place, or what you go through?
We have a list.
You have a Jimmy, I'm sorry.
We have a list.
Okay, you got a checklist.
So when we get ready to make sure, hey, we got these last things.
I'm not sure I like him because he's too organized for me. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. I'm kidding.
You got to take out the trash.
I understand.
Turn the thermostat down.
You got a list. So Jimmy says he has a list, stuff that he has to do before they get ready to go on the trip, before they get ready to leave. You got a checklist. A, B, C, do whatever, scratch them off. Anybody else? You got the same? Well, I'm not sure I like you either because you're too organized. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
My dad was in the Air Force, and so my children's dad, and we moved a lot. I had to be, not only for myself, but for my children.
Okay.
And you can't, or if I go see Joe now, I can't forget my purse at home.
I understand.
What do I do without my,
I understand.
I can get on the plane.
I get that. I understand. I'm just saying I'm not as organized as you guys. I'm lucky to make the plane on time. I'm just saying, okay? Some of y'all, God bless y'all, y'all can help me. But this is the night before, or time before. We don't know if it's the night before. This is time before they're getting ready to leave. Children of Israel have been praying to God, asking for a deliverance for over 400 years, and this is it. Now this Passover meal is to be eaten the way it was eaten, and again, I'm convinced it was a reminder, eat quickly, and God's going to bless you. And again, I made reference to the Lord's Supper. We still partake of the feast of the unleavened bread. Okay. Again, historically, they didn't have time for the yeast to rise. It was time to go. Well, can you please wait till the bread? It's not. No, grab it and go. It's time to get. And again, this lamb that was supposed to be killed and the blood on the doorpost, that references Christ. A lot of our modern day things that we still do. And what I find interesting in this, and then I'll move forward to chapter 14, what I find interesting is, like your checklist and yours too, God is still orchestrating the whole thing. God is already telling them, this is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to do it. And we have a choice. They had a choice to either follow God's instruction or, another granny word, lollygag, and displease God. And we see here, they're getting ready. They're getting ready to go.
Brady,
Yes, sir.
I bet they did one thing we always do the night before.
What is?
We stay up too late.
Oh,
I bet they stayed up too late.
I bet they didn't go to sleep.
I bet they didn't.
I'm just we're talking. We're just chatting.
The excitement,
My daughter does the same thing. I can always tell when she's getting ready to travel because most normal people, unless it's an emergency, know not to ring my phone after 10:30 at night. Sister girl will call me at 11. Hey, old man, just want you to know I'm about to go here and here and here. I said, you could have sent me a text. I'm just saying. But she's getting ready to travel. Her routine is she does not sleep. She's up getting everything ready, and she's so wired, she cannot sleep. Can you imagine the children of Israel the night before? But now, watch this. So now we're looking at them charting. God's actually charting their course. They don't even know. There's no map. There's no GPS. If you were to ask the neighbors then, Are y'all packed? Yeah. Well, where are we going? I don't know. I don't know. Does anybody know where we're going? No. Well, I heard Moses knows. Okay, we're in good shape. You know? Can you imagine just some of the night before chatter? And all that reinforces the fact that God is ultimately charting. All they knew was where we're going has got to be a whole lot better than what we got here. And it's time to get out of this bondage. It's time to now chart our course over to what God wants us to do. Look at verse 14. This is the day you are to commemorate for generations to come. You'll celebrate, as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. That sound familiar? What we do every Lord's Day. For 7 days you are to eat bread without yeast, and on the first day remove the yeast from your houses. Again, this feast of this unleavened bread. God is charting their course. Sometimes all the time really, when you're following God, I don't need all the why questions answered. That's where faith comes in. If I try to figure it out myself, usually that's where I mess it up. So the charting of the course for Israel, can you imagine on the human side? The questions that they had, but it really didn't matter because God was ultimately in control and God was ultimately charting their course. God was in charge of where they're supposed to be. Questions, comments? Look at chapter 14. Now, not only are we leaving and the death angel has passed over and saw the blood on the doorposts, and we said this earlier, now this last round of these plagues has affected Pharaoh and trouble has come to his house and it has affected his firstborn son. Now God is in control. They've left, but along the way, you can start off in one direction, and it's all right for God to change his mind. It's all right for God to change direction when it comes to the course. Look at chapter 14, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-Hahiroth, which is between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp at the sea directly opposite of Baal-Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around in the land, confused and hemmed in the desert. And I think verse 4 is worth us talking about for a second because we've been hinting at it for a while. But verse 4, I want to stop and talk about it. God is saying, I will harden Pharaoh's heart and he will pursue them. Wonder why? And all before this, remember, we referenced the fact that Pharaoh was hardening his heart. But for the second time, not the first time. But here's the second instance where God is saying, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Wonder why?
I think to show his power and his love for his people.
Okay.
That I'm going to set an example right here.
Remember, each one of the plagues was a direct assault against one of the Egyptian gods. If you didn't get a copy of that handout, I think I've got some more back there. But if you'll remember, each one of those 10 plagues was a direct confrontation. I should have put cancellation. I didn't think of it till after I printed those. But was a direct cancellation of each one of those Egyptian gods. And something that we brought out that I want to remind us of, here you have Pharaoh and his people over here, and here you have God's people unaffected by those plagues. Again, Mandy and I were chatting. That's one of the reasons, Mandy, I think you're absolutely right. God told them to stay separate long before these 10 plagues for a reason. And I think that was one of the reasons. Can you imagine all the plagues and the boils and the frogs and all of that? And looking over, and we don't know how far, but they were separate. It bothered Pharaoh and his people. It did not bother God and the people of Israel. I think that's fascinating. But in this case, God's saying, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Jimmy, I think you're right. Because there are times when we think that we're all that. But I can say me, I can't speak for you. Usually when my back's up against the wall, usually I want to listen, okay? When I feel like something's wrong and you got something to offer me, circumstances aren't going my way, usually that's the best time to catch me, when my spirit is open and I need to listen. I was new to Abilene, probably within a year, maybe 12 months of being in Abilene, and like a new college couple, thought I knew everything, but I didn't. I didn't know everything. The car actually blew an engine, and back then I think it may have been $500, $700, I can't remember, to fix the engine. An older man at church told me, he said, "Son, if it was you, if it was me, that's still a good car. Engine ain't no problem. It's paid for. You don't need to get into payments. I mean, come up with I think it was I can't remember. Come up with whatever that amount was. I know a good mechanic to, redo that. And you'll still be riding when you won't have any payments." Ernest, guess what happened? Young college kid just had to have me a new car, okay? To me, this was a sign from God. This was a sign from God. This thing old. The car lot said they'd give me $1,100 for. No, I think it was $1,000. Yeah, it was. It was that. They'll give me $1,000 for this junker. Boy, I'm on easy street. Y'all know where the end of the story is going. I know you know. That was the first of many mistakes, and I should have listened. But my heart, my heart was hardened against that car, and you couldn't convince me. Now looking back on it, I should have listened. That was Brother Garrett, actually, man I talked about before. I should have listened to Brother Garrett, because he was right. And I just didn't. I'm not saying God hardened my heart. I'm not saying that. But I am saying at a certain point, I think we're more malleable. I think we're more open to listen, or should be, when the chips are down. Don't be like me. My heart was hardened, and that was the beginning of many, many financial heartaches. Like they never got that car paid for. But as a college kid with a part-time job, should have never had a car payment. Should have never had a car payment. My heart wasn't in a place to where I would listen. Go ahead, Mandy.
That comes with age.
I'm sorry?
That comes with age.
Yeah, but I needed to hear it back then.
Most young adults at that age would have done the same. I'm not saying it's right.
I understand.
I'm saying that wisdom like that comes with age, because then you learn to listen to someone that has more experience.
Yeah, I listened the next time. It happened shortly thereafter with something else. This time I went back, and we had rented a place. I can tell you the end of this story. We had rented a place, and it ended up needing some work done, and couldn't get a hold of the landlord. I went to Brother Garrett. I said, "Brother Garrett, this plumbing in here is acting up. What do you recommend?" Now, this is the same man that did not wash my face in it when I made a decision contrary to what he recommended. He loved me enough, Jerry, and in his mind, I can already, when I drove that new car up to church, I can already in his mind, oh, that young fella is in for a world. But he didn't say nothing. He didn't hurt my feelings. He didn't, oh, that looks good. Look like you got a new car there. In his mind, I already know. He was just laughing, but he never said it out loud. So this time, we had plumbing issues in the rent house, and I told him. I said, I can't get a hold of the landlord. I've tried, and we need to have this fixed. You know what Brother Garrett did? Brother Garrett had a plumber friend come over and fix that. It wasn't too terribly bad. And he left me an invoice. He said, "Oh, I know your landlord. Just give him that, and he'll send me a check. He's out of town right now. You won't be able to get him." I said, "Oh, well, I didn't know that." But had I not listened the second time, it would have been a big catastrophe, just like that car. And so maybe Mandy, you're right. Maybe that's maturing. Maybe that comes with maturity. I think that also comes with a sense of, okay, I took my lumps on this one. I might not. Look, that hurt. I ain't going to do it this time. Now, why am I going into all this detail? I don't think Pharaoh quite took his lumps like he thought he would. And I think, Jimmy, you're right. God is setting Pharaoh up one last time, because Pharaoh's even going to saddle up and go after the children of Israel. And that's the last nail in his coffin, literally, pun intended. So we get to the point to where even though God charts our course, sometimes God will point us to where we need to make a change and change our course and go this way. God had another reason for sending them this way, and I think we'll read this in a minute. Verse 4, I'll harden Pharaoh's heart, then he'll pursue them, but I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. That's your point, Jimmy. So the Israelites did this. In other words, the Israelites went this way after God changed their course, because ultimately everything that we're reading, everything is pointing to the fact that God wants and deserves ultimate glory. And we need to learn. We need to learn to listen to God. If God says go left, we go left. God says go right, we go right. But he never forces us, does he? It's always up to us. He loves us enough. And it's always, always up to us. Go ahead, Ernest.
You and I had a conversation about that, about just heart to heart, and I was asking you and stuff like that. And so I kind of remember, about the homosexuality in Romans. God gave them over.
God gave them up.
Okay,
He did.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I give up on you.
And the expression, I think the young people, you do you. But that doesn't mean that there aren't consequences for actions. By the way, that has become a favorite expression of mine now. Thank y'all really for that. And I'm working on some things in my own life, and I'm working on, I don't know where this is going. I've been doing some writing lately on that. And I don't know if it's an article, but when you see it, just realize y'all help spark it. God did through you guys. I'm working on some material right now that's called The Action of Consequence. How that choices that we make don't go without actions. And I'm really looking at really this Exodus 12, 13, and 14 as kind of a proof text for that. And so I have y'all to thank for that, because really that's a message, it's a lesson I think that we all need to learn, especially, I can say younger now because I'm a little bit older, especially those generations under me. You don't realize, like I didn't realize when I bought that new car, 4 years is a long time, okay, to make payments, especially when you can't see the future as two struggling college kids and you got to sit down eventually and make a choice. Wait a minute, now we don't have enough to do both, and we got rent, and we go, oh, Lord, I shouldn't have done. I mean, you got, actions have consequences. So when y'all read that, whatever I decide to do with it, y'all actually have the genesis. Y'all have the genesis for that. Y'all have the credit for doing that. So God is changing Israel's course. So the Israelites did exactly what God wanted. Verse 5 of Exodus 14, when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials, here it comes again, Jimmy, there it is, changed their minds about them and said, what have we done? We've let the Israelites go and have lost their services. What's he saying here? I mean, in English. What's he saying?
Freedom slaves.
And that represents, you said this about 2 weeks ago, Jerry, that slavery represented an economic investment. So now he's evaluating, not right or wrong, I'm not on the moral side, just the pure financial side of it. Jerry, he's lost some money. He's lost some money. And he ain't happy. I mean, he is just frazzling, not happy. And again, we see Pharaoh's heart flip-flopping and changes. Now he's realizing, okay, I've lost their services. What he's saying, my opinion, I've lost some money. What do you do when you realize you made bad financial investments? So he went and had his chariot made ready, and he took the army with him, And he took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the chariots of Egypt and the officers. What's his plan? What's his plan? Look, you jokers coming back whether you want to or not. I don't care what. Okay? So can you imagine now? It's been doing the flip-flop, but except the last 4 plagues, remember? They affected Pharaoh and his house. Now he realizes he's going to lose some money. He's losing some significant financial gain. He's taken off, and he's going to bring them back. Verse 8, the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching boldly. The Egyptians and all the Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen and all the troops pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they encamped by the sea of Pi-Hahiroth, opposite of Baal Zephron. You know, I've read this a lot, but it wasn't until this week when I was rereading this again, God set him up. I mean, I've seen it before, but I can appreciate. Can y'all see that? God set him up. I don't think he fully realized that actions had consequences. And he was set up and was set up in such a way that God ultimately got the glory. God changed the course of the children of Israel, told them to go this way, I think in direct response to knowing what Pharaoh would do, and he I wish I had a map and I'd show it to you, and trapped them. I mean, they were just completely trapped. To where, what we're going to read here in a minute, the only way forward is the Red Sea. And so that the children of Israel would know, hey, wait a minute, God's about to split the Red Sea like a deck of cards. Pharaoh's going to realize, oh, we got them now. Children of Israel get across, dry land, close up on Pharaoh, and end of story. Can you imagine what they would actually see? This is what the result when God changes our course. Look at verse 9. The Egyptians and all the Pharaoh's horses and chariots and troops pursued them. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there was the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord and said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to the wilderness to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you, leave us alone? I'm going to be back to this next week in the sermon, so I'm not going to stay here too long. But isn't it interesting the kind of tunes we sing when we perceive that we're in trouble? Isn't that, to me, that is very, very interesting. And, you know, I've said this before. Y'all can jump in on this. I don't read anywhere before this or after this that the children of Israel were telling Moses, leave them alone. I don't read it. What I do read is they were thankful for the deliverer. And it wasn't until they got in trouble that they start looking back and saying, no, you should have left us. No, you were happy to get out of Egypt, but now, you know, salvation always costs you something. Obedience always costs you something. So now look at what they start to whine and complain. Because there was no graves in Egypt, you brought us out here to the desert to die. What have you done to us? Did you catch that? What have you done to us? Okay? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone? No, you didn't. I mean, I don't read it. Look at the end of it. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Really? Let me think. You were slaves. I just think that's hilarious. I do. It just speaks to the human condition. You know, I think this is how we act when we perceive we're in trouble. And when we don't give God his props or God his due. Look at verse 13. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid. Stand firm. You'll see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians, which you see here, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Those are still good words today in my life. To me, those are still good words today, because I like the Israelites, I see some things in my life and I don't see a way forward. I don't see a path out of it, and I get to grumbling and mumbling and complaining. But I just need to be still. And usually it's in that stillness, it's in that quiet where God will usually send me, not that he's talking to me audibly, no, but God will help me to see a way out if all I have to do is just be still and trust him. But Mandy, that sure is hard to do. And I will say this, the older I get, the easier it's getting. I will say that. I mean, you mentioned about maturity and wisdom. I will admit, the older that it's easier to trust him. It wasn't when I was 19, 20, 30, 40, 50. I'm sorry. But it is now. It's getting easier. But I think this was a direct result for the children of Israel. They needed to see that God was taking care of his business. For Pharaoh and his army, they needed to see God meant what he said, and you cannot defy. You cannot defy God. If you had to explain a takeaway, I'll give you the next section. If you had to explain a takeaway from this, what would it be? If you had your own takeaway and your own lesson for this, what would it be?
I think part of this is what Brother Anderson said. I think the Israelites lost hope.
You really got that too, Jimmy, didn't you? That rang true with you, didn't it?
Yep.
It rang true with me too.
I think they lost all hope when they needed it the most. Right?
When they needed it the most. And usually we do lose hope when our back's up against the wall. We do. Because we can't physically see a way out. Well, maybe we're not supposed to see with these eyes. Maybe that's when we're supposed to see with our spiritual eyes or trust God.
Our faith is supposed to come in.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
It's easier to say than do.
It is. Aid to the men. I'm telling you, but yes, maybe that's it. Maybe I need to learn those particular lessons. What are the takeaways? If you had to explain or give a takeaway from this, what would it be? Anybody else?
Trust in the Lord and lean not on your own understanding.
And Jimmy and I have a broken record, but we're going to say it again. Ernest, that's easy for you to say that. That quote, that rolls right off the tongue. That sure is not easy to do all the time. And I admit it.
I agree.
I admit it.
Actions are hard sometimes, but
They are. They truly, truly are.
that's what that word is, trust.
That's what it is. It's all about trust. Go ahead, Mandy.
Impatient means
Uh-oh. I'm not sure I like that.
there's what.
Mandy said y'all are impatient
No,
beings.
I did not.
Yes, she did. Oh, okay. I added something. I'm sorry. we.
Psalm we sing, wait upon the Lord, right down on my knees.
Yeah.
That song brings me to tears every time because it is absolutely, sometimes almost impossible.
Yeah.
And it's very right.
It is very right. I was playing, but she said we. It's all of us. And it is. It is all of us. And usually, I'll say me. I can't say we. If I go ahead and try to handle it on my own, usually it's broken too many pieces. It would have been broken less pieces, or maybe not broke at all, if I'd have just left it alone and let God handle it. That's just me, And so again, the idea here is trust. So God was charting Israel's course. God ultimately changed Israel's course. He ultimately changed Pharaoh's mind. We read about that. And I think that's a direct result because God knew the intent of Pharaoh's heart. You can say one thing, but your actions dictate something totally different. Oh, yeah, you can go, okay, good. It wasn't, I don't know how much longer, but it wasn't 2 seconds later. He changed his mind, realized how much money he lost. And I think there's something else to that as well, and I can infer this from the text. I think this spoke to his leadership. Not only are you losing this much money, Jerry, but now in the eyes of his people, because Pharaoh was considered king, considered a god, how much faith in their leader would they have? I think this also spoke to his leadership, not just the amount of money that he was losing. I think he would have lost a lot of credibility with his people. I think it spoke to that as well. So it doesn't surprise me that he told the boys to settle up. That doesn't surprise me, but that wasn't a good idea at all. Okay? So charting Israel's course, then changing the course. They were going one way. If you look at the map, you'll see it. Actually, the way that God really wanted, that they should have gone when you look at the map, was a shorter way. But, you know, again, it came out. If they get into war, they're not ready. And so they get beat up, then they'll leave anyway. So God sends them the long way around. This route was kind of the long way around. Then he changed Pharaoh's mind. And then he had an opportunity to calm Israel's fear. Look at verse number 10. Again, as Pharaoh approached, Israelites looked up. Can you imagine what they thought when they saw the cloud of dust and all of the horses and army coming? Can you imagine? Well, they say what they were actually thinking. But can you just imagine? And God had been leading them all up until this point. Now the Red Sea's this way. Pharaoh and his army are back there. And here comes the fear. And we talked about this, all the things coming up. You should have left us alone, and we had it better. No, you really didn't. You forgot the fact that you were slaves. You really didn't. And so he calmed their fears. And then look at God's divine intervention. Verse 15, he says, be still. What you see and who you see, you're not going to see him anymore. The Lord says to Moses, verse 15, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff. Stretch out your hand. Excuse me. Divide it. Stretch out your hand over the sea and divide the water so the Israelites can go through the sea to dry land. What's the biggest river mass you've ever seen? What's the biggest river mass you've ever seen? You've seen the Pacific Ocean? I don't think I have. I've seen the Atlantic, but not the Pacific. What's the biggest water mass that you've ever seen? Biggest river?
Biggest river?
Yeah.
Mississippi.
You saw, okay. I saw when I crossed over. In fact, when my children, in this same car that I shouldn't have bought, we had 2 kids back then, and we were driving to get to Detroit to go see Grandma. Back then, flying was not an option. In fact, let me deviate for a second. And driving to see Grandma, again, Grandma was in Detroit, and we're in Abilene, okay? So Nashville, roughly past Nashville, is about halfway. Well, it was halfway, Ernest, because my wife had a sister that could accommodate us, and we could stay with her overnight, and so Nashville was about halfway. We make it to Nashville. So when we first crossed the Mississippi River, my daughter read the sign, Mississippi River. Dad, is that the same one? Are we going to see Mark Twain? I'm like, I'm trying to drive. It's late at night. We got to get to Aunt so-and-so's house. But I said, now this is a teachable moment. I can't, even though I'm tired and I'm hungry. And Ernest, they were getting on my lap. Oh, y'all never been there. Okay, all right, I'm sorry. Y'all never been there. They were getting on my last nerve. I had to take a teachable moment. I don't remember the name of the city where we were, but you crossed that big old bridge. It's over the Mississippi River. So I took a moment to kind of explain as we were going over not only the Mark Twain and all the literary reference, but really look at the awesomeness of God. Look how big this river is. And to this day, my children, there was 2 of them at the time. Freddie was the baby, so he doesn't remember. But my 2 girls remember that to this very day, even though I was tired and I was hungry. And y'all never been there, okay. I took a moment to teach my children. He said, tell them to move on. The reason I'm getting to this, and I'll finish this next week, you know, the biggest river that you've seen probably pales in comparison to seeing the Red Sea. And almost like God was saying, what are you crying to me for? You already got the power in your hand. Mandy, this takes me back to the question that God asked when Moses was in God's office. What's that in your hand? A staff. Okay. The power to solve this, Moses, is in your hand. Raise your staff up, and then the Red Sea is going to be split like a deck of cards. And then the children of Israel are going to go across the sea to dry ground, and I'm going to harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they'll go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all of his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I'm God, I'm the Lord, and when I gain glory through Pharaoh and his chariots and his horsemen. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop right here. I'll finish the rest of this next week. Everything that we do, everything that we go through is for us to really give glory to God, and God needs to have the preeminence in our lives. Final questions, comments? Thank you all very much. We'll be dismissed and get ready for our morning worship. Thank you very much.
Shayla, how many kids do you have?
Oh, thank you.